Hello everyone and welcome along to the latest edition, installment of our live webinars. And today we'll be covering CMS and CRM integration. So welcome everybody. I know there's quite a few of you across the globe, and we've still got a few more to sign in. So we'll give it another minute just to wait for a few more to join in before we start the webinar. Very good. That's everyone signed up now. So first and foremost, we're just going to go over some house rules. This is being recorded and will be available straight after the session, so don't worry too much about taking notes. If you do have a question, however, we'd love to receive them. So please use the area within your control panel to ask any questions, and we'll collate them all at the very end. And then ask ourselves and John some of the questions around that. So by way of introduction, my name is Eddie Rice. I'm one of the customer success managers here at i3 Digital. You can see by my Twitter handle there as well. Feel free to reach out, although do be aware you'll see a lot of cycling details on Twitter along with some digital marketing stuff, so don't be afraid. Also, the man of the hour, Jon Eaton, who is our head of customer success and sales here at i3 Digital as well, who'll be doing the webinar today. But before we touch on to the agenda, I'd just like to promote our next webinar, which will be on Wednesday, the 7th of March, where we'll be talking about UX and GDPR and how the two marry together. Quite a hot topic with it coming up in May of this year. GDPR is something that people are extremely interested in. So that's at 4 p.m. on Wednesday the 7th of March. If you're interested, would like to join in, please email keith@i3digital.com to register for that session. So moving on to the agenda, today we're going to be covering a whole raft of topics. What sort of website and app activity can be recorded in your CRM? You obviously want to take note of that and actually manage and record what is going on with your interactions between your site and your CRM as well. What are the best CRM and CMS combinations? And of course, these things are subjective, but we're just lending our experience and expertise onto that. We'll then be going into the CMS, CRM, and GDPR and what you need to know, and then finalizing that off with why bi-directional CMS and CRM integration could be the key to unlocking your personalization strategy. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over now to Jon Eaton, who will take us into our webinar session.
Thanks a lot for that. That's great. Thank you. So I'm going to start off by doing just a bit of a session on recording digital activity in your CRM. I'm going to do that through the lens of two of our clients. So the first client I'm going to look at today is Bechtel, who are the world's largest construction company. And they are a client who's got a long sales cycle. And there are lots of different clients that we have who have this challenge, but long sales cycle tends to have lots of different touch points along the way to make sure that you're constantly front of mind with customers when they do get around to buying. So for them, events are really important, as it is to a lot of organizations who have long sales cycles. They're really crucial for remaining relevant within the target audience between when they're actually buying. And events within construction at the moment are going through a bit of a kind of revamp, in that rather than just having massive stands with lots of brochures to take away, there are more interactive things now available at events. And virtual reality and augmented reality, particularly within construction, are very important ways of engaging with target customers and actually giving a reason to follow up that's tailored, rather than just saying, you were on our stand, therefore you're going to get 30,000 emails over the next 2 years, which doesn't work. The other thing that they're reliant on to some extent is tenders. And similar to our business, actually, we're reliant on either tenders or request for proposal. And website visits before those tenders come in are actually potentially an indication of early interest. And there's the next slide I'm going to talk about, what we can do before a customer becomes sales ready to make sure that when we do get to that point, we are at the front of the queue rather than at the back. The second thing is, once the tenders are in, does that demonstrate some interest? Does that mean that actually this piece of business potentially is going to come in for us? Alongside that, as I mentioned earlier on, outside of the buying cycle, having white papers, webinars, and Q&As that help the end audience really help to make sure that you remain an important influencer within their understanding of their own industry and how they might use your service. So again, having that sort of content there is a really good way of keeping somebody engaged throughout a marketing automation routine. And then finally, acquiring customers on long sales cycles costs a lot of money. So if we're finding that after we've got clients that the number of logins are dropping or the status checks are dropping, that could suggest that actually we've got a wider problem with that account, and that what we need to do is look at reaching out maybe from an account management perspective to see if we can provide any comfort. So how does that look? Well, as I mentioned earlier on, there's a long time between somebody thinking I have a building contract to actually parting with some cash. So as I mentioned, that concept earlier on of being sales ready, and the way in which I like to think about what we can be collecting from digital touchpoints prior to being sales ready, it's about what we can put in front of them before they become sales ready that means that they're going to be warm to us, so that we're starting that tender process or proposal process from the front of the queue rather than 3 or 4 places back. Once they've inquired, you might well know that there's a number of different things that have to happen to give you a good chance of someone buying from you. A really good example used within this sort of longer sales cycle model is car sales. So I don't know if you found it, but when you go into a car dealership, if you take a test drive, all of a sudden the excitement about the possibility of you becoming a customer really accelerates for the salesperson. And obviously there's lots of different touch points online, such as attending webinars, downloading white papers, all that sort of stuff that could indicate that somebody is further down the buying process and therefore likely to buy. There's a secondary thing. Measuring the likelihood of purchase is becoming increasingly a marketing challenge. And the reason for that is that organizations the size of Bechtel cannot plan their workforce requirements if they don't know how likely their pipeline is to drop. People see, organizations like Capita and also like Carillion recently. I'm not saying that was a definite factor in them having their problems financially, but certainly a lack of clear information can't have been helpful. So looking through the lens now of an organisation that is more regular, rapid, repeat purchase in Dublin bus, there's a different set of things we can start to record. First of all, the habits. If we know that somebody is travelling along a certain route in Dublin, do we know that that person is a commuter? And if so, should we treat them differently in terms of our ongoing communication with them from a CRM perspective? Additionally, are there related purchases? So if somebody is constantly going along a certain route in Dublin, but is buying single tickets rather than buying a monthly pass, is that something we can potentially upsell to them? Engagement. These customers often are so embedded in buying your product or service that actually there could be an opportunity for them to amplify the good things about your company. So what can we do in terms of initiatives that might be delivered via the CRM in terms of marketing automation to push people to, rather than just consuming your service, actually start to say really nice things about it online as well to potentially get other customers interested? Retention. Are we handling customer objections and issues? This is a massive issue for most B2C organizations, in that the marketing CRM will be completely different to the CRM or customer management system that manages complaints. And actually, as I'm going to come to towards the end, if you do not have a 360-degree view of the customer interaction, some of the messages you want to send to customers from the CRM or from the website could be completely inappropriate because the customer's either really annoyed or has already said in other communications that they're not happy for us to send any information to them. And then finally, replication. There's a lot of really good social listening tools at the moment that we can use to target additional customers. So if we've got all this information stored at CRM level, so their habits, their demographic, what engagement that they've done with us in terms of social before, can we use that information to try and find more of the same, and therefore identify the right people who might be our future customers? And a good example of how that's been sort of illustrated by one of our CMS partners is this customer experience maturity model by Sitecore. Effectively, their argument is you should try and take every single customer that you get, if you've got potential for repeat purchase, and move them from that initiation phase when they're just initially interested and may have bought maybe one thing, and push them to become lifetime customers, so people who are really valuable to you. In terms of the best CRM and CMS combinations, there's three we're going to talk about initially. In terms of best of breed, Sitecore and Microsoft are often put up there. They've certainly been pushed into a lot of organizations together by big consultancy firms like Deloitte and PwC, where people are looking for completely restructuring their entire business in one go. On the bottom left-hand side there, we've got a sector-specific CRM in Aptify, and they're connecting to Sitefinity CMS. And I did a project with Aptify and Sitefinity on my previous agency. Typically, you'll find there that the integration is incredibly well thought out because it's a proper commercial proposition, but not necessarily that extendable. And then finally, you do get, in 2 or 3 instances, examples where you've got a CRM and a CMS under the same product house, and SAP and Hybris are a great example of that. There's obviously benefits in having those 2 systems coming out of the same development. But having said that, some of these businesses now are so large that actually it's not necessarily an advantage, and there's also a big price to pay. Certainly the people playing in this space, SAP, Adobe, Oracle, they know how to charge for software. So most people looking for value for money tend to go for a CRM and CMS specialist separately. And what we've seen a lot of over the years, actually, is people moving towards the Salesforce and Kentico model of developing a really flexible API framework that allows them to integrate with lots of different systems. And actually, that seems to me to be the way in which the model's going. So I've just pulled up there on the right-hand side of the screen a front cover from The Economist from last year, where they were proclaiming that data rather than oil is now the world's most valuable resource. And actually, a lot of those different organizations there, Amazon, Uber, Google, Facebook, Booking.com, they've made their money by being very intelligent with how they manage data. And they don't actually hold physical stock for any of the individual business areas that they work in. So I think, my sort of takeaway from this is I wouldn't go for traditional CMS combination with the CRM. I try and find products that were flexible enough to be integrated regardless of the technology that you want to integrate them with. So what does that mean for CMS, CRM and GDPR? Well, we're just going to go through 3 different things that I think are important to remember. First of all, the right to be forgotten. Everybody seems to know about this, which is that from the 25th of March, anybody can be asked to be forgotten if they're a customer within an organisation trading in the EU. One of the interesting things is that moving forward, it's going to be very important for organisations to be clear as to how they got consent for holding people's data. So if you're ever in breach of GDPR, you're being advised now to have explicit detail as to why you collected that consent and what it was for. So whereas previously a lot of organizations have had contacts saved in their CRM as just being web lead, that's no longer allowed. It should be downloaded white paper and signed up as a secondary sign-on to receiving a monthly newsletter. The next area, not known about by most people, but I think probably the most disruptive, is data subject access requests. What this means is that any customer can ask for a full copy of all their data to be sent to them, and that's for free as well. So if you've not got all of your systems talking to each other and somebody asks to have a full copy of their data, there's a lot of administration that's introduced there in terms of actually getting that done. And it could be enormous amounts of data. So there's an article in The Guardian that might be worth having a look at, where one of the editors has spoken to Tinder and asked them to send over all their data, and she's got 800 pages of secrets about all the different stuff she was interested in, including potentially people she might find attractive. So there's lots of different touch points on websites, and you're probably best recording a lot of them, but making sure that you're being really explicit within your CRM as to when you've gathered consent and what it was for. This might seem a bit extreme, but I think it illustrates quite well the situation that marketing people are in at the moment. So all customer data, whether it's captured in your website, your CRM or ERP, it's all subject to GDPR. It's not just what's on the website. It's not just what's in the CRM. So actually, you've got to look at the whole strategy together. And one of the first things that the ICO is advising is that you should appoint a data controller within your organization who's responsible. As a data controller, the law now holds you responsible for any violation. So if you have got systems and you're worried that they're not GDPR compliant, you've got every right to be, because you can't point at the supplier and say the supplier wasn't GDPR compliant. The ICO is seeing you as the people who should be looking after all the data that's being given to you. And it's a bit like joint venture in criminal cases. So I like to think of the ICO as being as brutal as Harry Brown. It's not an excuse if you didn't correct the crime. So if you didn't do the crime, it's the fact that you were there that is it's going to lead to retribution. And one of the things that's being talked about as a solution is more systems integration. And the reasons for doing that are that obviously you're reducing the chance of a GDPR violation by looking at how you collect and manage data at an organizational level rather than as individual channels. And you're also reducing the costly administration of having to manage those data subject access requests. So it's even possible, if you set your website up, that you can basically, as somebody asks to have an access to all of their data, that you validate that that person exists within a central system, and then you could potentially automate the release of all that data back to that person. So actually cutting out pretty much the entire cost to the business of having to do that for free. So bi-directional integration and how this can unlock your personalization strategy. I like to look through this through the lens of what happens typically in organizations. I'm going to pull up two different people. So IT directors tend to be the people in control of CRM. The motivations tend to be to manage risk, and they're often trusted with sensitive data. Whereas your marketing director is motivated normally to increase business or generate more brand awareness, and typically is not trusted to the same level. And what that's led to is people who are trying to use data to interact better with customers in marketing directors having anecdotal data to work with, whereas the IT director is sitting on top of a load of data that could give a 360-degree view of the customer experience at any given time. But previously, before GDPR, probably would not have been motivated to actually make that data open and allow people to look at it. But actually, increasingly within IT directed publications, we're seeing a lot more in the way of ambition. So if you look at a lot of publications at the moment, most large businesses' IT teams are working on some sort of project to open up the data to the rest of the business and therefore improve the customer experience. And there are some really good benefits for doing that. Marketing can be much more confident on their automation because they've got richer data to choose from. That marketing communication is more contextual because you're not just having that conversation with the customer within one marketing channel of a website. You're having that communication with them across the entire customer experience, much of which the points are actually managed within the CRM system. And finally, it's easier to spot customer experience issues earlier on, which is, I think, a really strong thing. So I believe the key takeaways of this presentation so far, sorry, just to summarise before we hand back to Eddie for questions. Lots of stuff you can collect in CRM, website journeys, and that doesn't matter whether you're B2B or B2C. There's lots of different things you can do, and I'd strongly recommend that you think about how you can do it. We're moving to an age across all sectors, really, where everything will integrate with everything. And I think it's just really important that you make sure that you pick good products rather than looking for two products that are going to dovetail together seamlessly. I think you've got an expectation that's correct now, and that you can expect organizations that supply CMS and CRM products to think about future integration capability. GDPR means it's your responsibility to make sure that all your systems and processes are compliant. So it's important to be looking at this sort of stuff, and I applaud you guys for being on this webinar. A lot of organizations aren't even thinking about GDPR yet. And as well as solving the GDPR headaches, bi-directional integration actually offers you a chance to solve some bigger personalization challenges. And it's the sort of challenges that if you can fix, you can completely transform the customer experience of an organization, or the client or member experience of an organization, and deliver a much better service. So that's the end of the formal presentation. I'll pass back over to Eddie for some questions.
Great job, John. Thanks for that. There's quite a few questions that have came in now. The first one we have kind of ties back into the slide at the beginning where someone's asked, is Kentico really a good fit to integrate with Salesforce?
But yeah, I think it's a good question, because in the Kentico version 11, the marketing spiel was that there was going to be a connector for Salesforce, and there is, but it's available through another company, a connectors company. There is I suppose if you look at it in terms of the traditional model, it's a solution, but it's probably not as impressive as the amount of work that Sitecore did with Microsoft Dynamics. But I do think, given the kind of flexible framework of Kentico, people who are using that connector will probably find that it's very good and actually quite extendable as well.
Perfect. We've got one in now as well from Kiva in Dublin, and she's asking, is Zoho suitable to connect in with Kentico or Sitecore?
I've done a Zoho Kentico project before, and that went well. And I'm sure it worked well with Sitecore as well. Both Sitecore and Kentico spent a lot of money over the last couple of years in making sure that their systems have moved away from being all-in-one solutions, and they're now available to do whatever the client needs it to do. And I think that's true even of its own feature set. So if you're thinking of using Zoho not just as a CRM, but also potentially as a marketing automation function, then the open nature of both Kentico and Sitecore should make them good potential partners for that project.
Perfect. Oh, we've got one from an international customer here, Samuel from New York, is saying that should he be worried about GDPR? And if so, typically in those projects, who would be involved within the organisation?
So it would depend upon whether or not they're doing any business in the European Union. And I think most organisations are to some extent, even if you've got clients who are physically based in the US, but decision makers who are based in, say, the UK, then that still comes under GDPR. So I think in terms of who should be involved, as I said, one of the key things is to appoint within an organisation somebody who sort of sits as being responsible for data management within the organisation. And at the moment, what we've seen is that that's not uniform in terms of where that person lives within an organisation. In some instances, that person's been in IT. In some, they've been in marketing. So I think it depends on each business, but effectively you need somebody there who understands the business, who understands, on a day-to-day operational level, how customers are being interacted with. Because you could even apply GDPR principles into personal email folders such as Outlook, Gmail and that sort of thing as well. So it might not be that you can solve that problem via putting the right software in place, but you might be able to solve that problem by putting the right processes in place.
Perfect. And then the last question we have here is from Florence in London. She's asking, if you are using both a CRM and a CMS, where does the customer's information sit? Does it sit in just one, or would you have it in both?
It's a good question. So up until recently, a lot of the CMS providers were suggesting that you kept two copies, which would mean that you could reduce the amount of interaction you had to have in order to run personalization routines, i.e. you could run most of it from within the website rather than having to constantly call the CRM. I think now the fact that a lot of organizations are moving towards a single point of user data, or SPUD as we've called it previously, means that actually, even if you've got a reference to that person, say within the contact management function of your CMS, that record should really truly live at one source, so probably in your CRM.
Brilliant. Oh, sorry, John, we do have one last question here, and this is also from somebody called Eddie up in Scotland, funnily enough, and they're asking about security. Which would be the best CMS, CRM solution in terms of security?
That's a really good question. So I think I mentioned earlier on about the Aptify Site Affinity solution. And part of the reason why that's continued to exist even though the functionality hasn't really moved on tremendously since it was first launched into the UK market 10 or 15 years ago, is the fact that it is secure. So a lot of the CMSs and the CRM systems are kind of built to live within a cloud environment, therefore accessed via a web browser. You might find that there are sector-specific CRMs available that allow you to run that within a hosted location that's actually on-premise, and therefore that reduces the potential security breaches. But having said that, in terms of the solutions that you can find that are available on the mass market, I think the thing I would probably steer away from is anything that is open source. So I'm thinking things like Sugar are open source and therefore available for people to kind of get copies of and try and hack. But to be honest, even with that, there's not really in the same way as CMS, where you've got something like WordPress, a dominant player in the CRM marketplace, which is where most of the data is held and therefore the biggest threat from a security perspective. So you're probably okay to look at most products out there that are available, and I just make sure that you speak to anybody who's potentially looking at selling you a CRM product or a CMS product and ask them what their solution is on GDPR in particular. If they haven't got a solution on that, then it's probable there's going to be holes in the rest of the proposition as well.
Perfect, John. Thanks a lot for that. Really good answer to that question. So, guys, that's the end of today's webinar. All that's left to do is to thank everyone who joined the webinar session, and also just to remind everyone that the next webinar is on Wednesday, the 7th of March, where we'll be talking about GDPR and UX, and that's at 4 p.m. So please do register with Keith at i3digital.com. And as a final reminder, this session has been recorded and it will be sent to you after the event as well. So thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next live webinar session. Take care.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Cheers.